Today we're discussing Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's first movie since Tenet, and it stars Killian Murphy as the physicist himself. The story acts as a biopic for the father of the atomic bomb, Robert J. Oppenheimer, as we see his early life in physics, his time working on the Manhattan Project, and the trials following that project. Well, you probably guessed this already, but Oppenheimer was one of my top 10 most anticipated movies of the year coming in, and there are obvious reasons for that. Christopher Nolan has directed many of my favorite movies, including my favorite movie of all time, Inception. And if you look at the cast from top to bottom, this very well could be the best cast of the 21st century so far. Although I was hesitant going in because I'm not the biggest fan of biopics, and Christopher Nolan's last historical movie, Dunkirk, wasn't my cup of tea. I think that movie could have been much better. Let's begin this review by talking about the star of Oppenheimer, Killian Murphy. I've always loved the guy as an actor. He got his starring role on TV in Peaky Blinders, and now he finally has his blockbuster movie to call his own. Killian Murphy eats up every second he's on screen. This was classic method acting. He lost tons of weight to play the character. He completely embodied the persona of Robert J. Oppenheimer. He's that good in this film. I think he deserves an Oscar. As for the rest of the cast, it's sensational. There are so many actors in Oppenheimer who show up that people who watch movies will immediately recognize. It's somewhere in the number 30 to 40 range of the amount of actors just like that. Now, I read the cast list multiple times on IMDb before seeing Oppenheimer, and even during my showtime, there were still instances where I was like, holy crap, it's so-and-so. I could not believe just how many actors that we recognize as movie fans appeared in Oppenheimer. It's mind-boggling. From a cinematic and story perspective, it's a true spectacle. Every moment of this film feels big. Even when characters are talking, most conversations are important to the main story, and the music sells every scene like it's the most crucial sequence of the year in cinema. Oppenheimer has Christopher Nolan's mark written all over it. There is not a single scene in this film where you're watching and you think this movie was not directed by Christopher Nolan. Every single thing about Oppenheimer feels like a Christopher Nolan movie. I found the story fascinating. It's interesting to see the consequences an event like this had in our world, and especially for Oppenheimer himself. One thing running through my head while watching Oppenheimer was that for Oppie, this was a moral thing. He knew he had to create this bomb in order to potentially end World War II, but at the same time, how many lives will this bomb cost? The movie is intense, dramatic, beautifully filmed, and heavily detailed. But this is where my review veers into the not-so-perfect elements of Oppenheimer. This is not Christopher Nolan's best movie, in my opinion, but if you're a history buff and love the story of Robert J. Oppenheimer, you might love this movie so much to the point where it's your favorite Christopher Nolan movie of all time. I can completely understand that. The problem for me is just how detailed Oppenheimer is. The amount of research that went into Oppenheimer is impressive. But also, you have to put in consideration that I'm not a history buff. I did no research on Robert J. Oppenheimer's story before watching the film. All I knew about this story was that we dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. With that being said, if you did no research on this story before seeing Oppenheimer, chances are you might have gotten lost during the movie. The same can be said for myself. While I was able to follow the beats and flow of Oppenheimer's story, there were many times when they get into these in-depth discussions about the government and Oppenheimer's potential betrayal to America and all the physics, where I found myself getting confused and lost quite often. So again, it's impressive how dense the film is, but at the same time, for the average moviegoer, I feel like a lot of people won't be able to follow the story. It doesn't help that the sound mixing, just like in Tenet, is not perfected in Oppenheimer. There were so many times where I could not put together what a character was saying, and then before I could figure it out, the scene would keep going and I would get more lost. I think another obvious flaw with Oppenheimer is its length and what it chooses to focus its story on. You shave off about 40 minutes of runtime and it already becomes better. Plus, I don't like how this movie focused so much on the trials of Robert J. Oppenheimer. If it were up to me, I think the movie should have just focused mainly on the creation of the bomb and the aftermath of when the bombs went off. But I get it, this is a biopic about Oppenheimer, so therefore you need those trials to come after the bombings. However, for the sake of making making a better movie, just trim all of that stuff out and give us some titles at the end to tell us what happened after the events of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So final thoughts on Oppenheimer. It has one of the best casts of the 21st century. It's epic, it's heavily detailed, a very dense film. It's everything that Christopher Nolan has ever made put into one movie. It might be too long and detailed for the common man like myself, but I still think you definitely should see this in theaters. So I'm giving Oppenheimer a 7.5 out of 10. After all, guys, this is a Christopher Nolan movie. I don't care if the film sucks. You should still go see it on the biggest screen possible because it's made by Christopher Nolan, one of the most influential directors of our time. So what did you guys think of Oppenheimer? Let me know down below in the comment section if you found it exciting or boring, and what do you hope Christopher Nolan makes next? I imagine his next feature film will come out in 3 years because for the last decade he's been doing this every 3 years thing. So look at 2026 for the next Christopher Nolan movie. And of course, guys, as always, if you are new to my channel, click the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a fantastic day.